Hello, everybody. This is Stephen Whitfield, drilling contractor here at the 2022 IADC Contracts and Risk Management Conference in Houston, Texas. With me right now is Margaret Kidd, Program Director and Instructional Associate Professor of Supply Chain and Logistics at the University of Houston. We're going to be speaking a little bit about the energy markets and where things are going, what things have been doing so far. See what's going on. So, Professor, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Stephen, for hosting me.
So, first question, and I guess this is sort of the elephant in the room with a lot of things in our economy, but particularly this industry, is the Russia-Ukraine conflict. And you spoke a little bit in depth about sort of the impact that conflict has had on both supply chain and I guess on the industry as a whole. So could you speak a little bit about what some of that impact has been?
Sure. I mean, the supply chain was already under tremendous pressure from COVID, with on again, off again, port closures, rolling zero tolerance in China. And, this was the most difficult time for there to be a war in the middle of already an existing supply chain disruption. And when you consider that Russia was exporting 7 to 8 million barrels a day prior to the Ukraine situation, and Russia and Ukraine represent about 30% of the wheat production in the world, you see disruption not only of fossil fuels, but also the food supply chain, which really has caused a lot of inflation, both throughout Europe and throughout the world.
So I guess one thing that we've seen in response to Russia's invasion was the sanctions that we saw, particularly in the European Union. And that's had an impact for sure on, I guess, gas imports and oil imports, what have you. So what would you say that Europe is doing right now to sort of address these sort of short-term supply shortfalls?
Well, we're seeing, I believe it's the 8th round of sanctions occurring in Europe. The reality of the situation is Europe did not have a really energy security policy that could weather this storm. I mean, you're seeing folks scramble, you're seeing a pivot to, much dirtier forms of industry. I mean, look at Germany ramping up some coal-fired plants, right? Energy security is real. It's a wake-up call for Europe that they need to diversify not only their sources of energy, but the types of energy that they're using for their economy.
So another thing that you discussed was the Global Container Freight Index, and that's a pretty important indicator of sort of where our economy is going and something that would be interesting for industry. So where is it now? How does it compare to where we were last year? And what does the Global Container Freight Index say about the economic health?
Well, there are a number of indexes, but trade is a barometer of GDP, of the health of an economy. And so prior to 2019, you saw containers trading around under 2,000, right? And during COVID, where we had this excessive demand for trade with China, manufacturing was coming from China to the U.S. You saw rates as high as 19,000 and higher for a container. Now that's calmed down now. Earlier this year, down to about 12,000 a container, and now on average about 4,000. But we're starting to see ships cancel their sailing schedules, which is a sign of really consumers slowing down on their spending and also taking into account the incredible inventories that currently exist in the U.S.
And lastly, sort of looking at the energy market itself, you had noted that going out to 2028, we might see a shift in CapEx from renewables as sort of the focus of a lot of economies right now to sort of mature carbon. Could you explain why we might see that shift?
There's been a tremendous underinvestment in fossil fuels over the last decade, and the reality is energy transition is going to have to occur in a parallel system. You're going to have both to get to net zero. And as our economies age out, the US, the European, the Australian economy, where we're approaching very low birth rates, you're seeing the growth of population in the less developed world, and that's where you're going to see more and more demand for fossil fuels. This is going to be really tricky, transitioning at a period where there's a lot of insecurity.
Well, Professor, thank you so much for giving your insight on the state of the market right now. Everybody wants to know, so thank you so much again.
My pleasure, Stephen.
And thank you for visiting Drilling Contractor.